Hello, 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 hello. All right. Are we getting something there? Yes, yes. Okay. All right. Tonight is your night to begin with. When we left off last December, I said that you had an assignment, and your assignment was for yourself to determine what you think an idea is. You came up with something, right?
I thought I did.
All right. Let's.
Well, I think an idea is, I had given it a whole lot of thought, but is where our ability comes from to co-create. It is the beginning of where we do our creating. It is our process of creating. We are able to somehow absorb this from the universal mind, and through the process of thinking on any number of things, we give birth to ideas. And it is the first step in creating anything. So that's, I mean, I had it, I didn't write anything out, but that's the gist of it as to what I could come up with.
Okay. I agree with almost all of it, which is pretty good batting average with somebody as critical as I am. Anybody else got any? Mark, you got any notions?
Well, I never really thought it out to see if it stood up to scrutiny, but the only idea I had on it was that it involved something of the separation of a finite possibility out of the infinite possibilities of chaos. You sort of separate something out to give it an existence and life of its own.
I agree with that also. Only it would take quite a bit of detail how that is accomplished. But that's good going. Scott, you got anything?
I was laying there one night and I just thought this. I think it's like luck. Preparation meets opportunity.
Okay.
There has to be some kind of preparation and there has to be some kind of opportunity for a thought to be created.
Okay.
Preparation.
In a strange way, I agree with some of that. Not a lot, but but it's, yeah.
Ideas only come to you, though, if you are open to them. You have to have, if you don't open your mind, you will get no real ideas. I mean, you have to be open-minded and be in a receptive mode in order to receive that, any idea, or to get any idea.
Okay. Bonnie? No? Okay. Ken?
I think it's a possibility that we see within the divine. It's something that where you have this kind of the spirituality that can be or become almost anything, and it's when we see something in it of a possibility. I think that's when we're grasping an idea.
Okay, I agree with that too. Okay, Bob. You're just in time. It's your turn. You had the assignment was over the long break. What do you think an idea is? That was the question. What is an idea?
I haven't thought about it.
Okay.
We had an answer for you, but just don't get that. So.
All right. I have several answers to what is an idea. But sometimes when there are several answers to the same problem, it means the answerer doesn't really know what it is, but is faking it, or taking a blind stab, or propounding some kind of pet theory or something like that. In that regard, it's something like acne. There are many remedies for acne, and most of them don't work. And the ones that do seem to work don't do it consistently. We're truth seekers. And therefore, we have to be honest. Because honesty, especially self-honesty, is a necessary prerequisite to have a kind of character that can understand the truth or can receive the truth. So, in this, it's always wise to consider the possibility that we might be wrong. And that we might be wrong about what we seem to know. Now, the idea is abstract. It's transcendental. And we don't know very much about transcendental things, at least not the way we know about concrete things. Abstract things are universal. That means they're without beginnings and they're without ends, and they apply everywhere. And in order to understand that, we have to have abstract comprehension. Now, with all of this in mind, the fact that we are very, very young in our abstract abilities, and the fact that we have egoism and vanity and things like that, it's possible that everything that's going to be said tonight is illusion. There's a very real possibility of that. Maybe not outright false, but certainly not as precise as mathematics, which is nothing but ideas. Illusion is very tricky, and the kind of tricks that transcendent things produce is that since they're closer to the source of truth, anything that happens in higher realms feels like it's true, whether it is or not. I've had a lot of experience with that with people who were mentally ill or psychologically ill, that they were, I don't know how to say it, they were touching on things and experiencing things that they felt were true, but they weren't really onto them. Transcendental things, like ideas, are comprehended intuitively. With intuition, there are problems, because we're just as young with regard to intuition as we are with ideation. Even very highly evolved human beings are not especially rich in soul material, so that often there is little for the intuition to play on. We have to have the soul material in order to receive intuitions. And then we really don't give ourselves a lot to intuitive experiences. And there have been a lot of people that have not realized that the lower nature can mimic intuition very well. If you have the same intuition twice, the second one could very well be from the lower nature and not from your divine being. And so it's easy to get hooked by these illusions. There are some lovely works that are called the Philokalia. It's from saints of the Eastern Church, and it covers centuries worth of their writings, and this is a topic that comes up frequently in them. The being misled about things that seem to be true. Now, I very recently had an encounter with this kind of thing. Someone committed a very rash action and defended it by saying it was intuitive. And when questioned, the person said, well, you even told me I had a good intuition. However, I was guilty of not mentioning that the person also had a negative psychic ability that was mixed in with the intuition, and it wasn't clear which one was which. So, at this time in our inner consciousness, it's probable that there's a mixture of intuition and ego impulse where you think that many things are true. The personal ego will ride the gravy train of intuition, and the gravy train is very different from a gravy boat. The intuition never needs defense. It stands for itself, and it meets any test. Psychic things that come from the personal ego are always defensive. You press anything like that, and there's always defensiveness. So, the first answer to what is an idea is that an idea is an abstract thought. But that isn't really much of an answer. This is offered just as a means to get us in touch with the subject matter that we're working on tonight. We're still working on the world of thought, and we're talking about the region of abstract thought. And so, the first answer that comes up is that an idea is an abstract thought. And that brings up another question. What is an abstract thought? These questions have a way of multiplying very quickly. Now, when we were talking about the concrete region of thought, this concrete subdivision, we came across the mystical notion that seems very odd to some people, that concrete thinking is a process of evacuating. Thought stuff is evacuated, hollowed out, so to speak, to produce a tonally vibrating thought vacuum. The creative thought, or the creative thought form, is called an archetype. A creative archetype because it isn't just a model, it actually participates in the creation. Now, the notion was put forth that the attitude that does the evacuation is questioning. That when we question, we draw something out. And if we question well, we are open in our question to that hollowed out, so to speak, area will be filled with truth of some kind or another. We said that even imagination is a kind of questioning, which we find especially in the dual meaning in English of the word drawing. Drawing means to draw something, to sketch it, and drawing also means to suck something out. You draw somebody out to find out what they're thinking. Now, the vacuum is, and especially the thought form that is evacuated, is pretty complicated. It has flavors, it has all kinds of dimensionality, and it draws everything to it that is needed, including specific thought stuff, desire stuff, etheric stuff, and physical stuff. That's how we come to being. We create an archetype of this type, and we attract to us the material that we need to manifest it in concretion. So the form that we create is an expression of our evolution. That is, and it is an expression of our character, because our character determines the shape of the thought form. In this, we have described the process, but that changes the scope, or changes where we go with the question. The question then becomes about the thinker. Who is the thinker? Where is the thinker? What is the intent of the thinker? And all sorts of questions like that. Creative thoughts don't think themselves. There has to be a thinker. And when we're thinking, it's not just a random or lucky activity. No, it's all right. We're coming to that. I'll tell you when you were right on. It's a deliberate activity. It's not accidental, and it just doesn't happen along the way. But the whole thing is, we're not always completely self-conscious when we're thinking. We're semi-conscious. Sometimes if we are really, really aware, this is the way we unfold our awareness of our spiritual being, is being totally self-conscious in the process of thinking. See, our self-consciousness is only a small part of our being. Our being is as grand as the universe. And we're certainly not self-conscious of all the spiritual worlds. You know, I'm lucky if I'm conscious of even a little bit of what happens every day. So we can see that the thinker has to be somewhere in this. For openers, we can say that the thinker is a being that expresses itself creatively or investigatively in concrete thought. Now, though it is functioning in, or it is seated in concrete thought, it has to be in its nature beyond concrete thought. As we just noted, thoughts do not think themselves. They can be combined, and they can have something like a kind of life of their own, but to intentionally conceive of a concrete thought just doesn't happen by itself. This is why the spiritual life is a very deliberate life. It is a life where in our freedom we can do what we want to do. But in our freedom we cannot do anything, but that doesn't help anything. So there's always something new in thinking. And this is one of the big misunderstandings that the world has. The world thinks that thinking is all cut and dried, that all the important thoughts have been thought already, and all we have to do is learn them, memorize them, and we will then know the thinking. It's exactly the way Plato, we don't know whether it's Plato or Socrates, but says that let's follow the argument and see where it goes. It's like saying that thinking is something live, and it's something that it's new, and it's something that we haven't done before. Sometimes even following a path of thought all over again, you can see it in a different way because you're thinking anew the same sort of material. So it's not cut and dried. It's always live. So from all of this, we can conclude that a thinker is a being that functions in and through the concrete mind, but is beyond it. And since it's creative, and since it's free and deliberate, it has to be a spiritual principle. And it has to be a spiritual principle that is capable of expressing itself in the world of thought. We remember that in order to function in any world, we have to have a vehicle of consciousness that corresponds to that world. And therefore, to think thoughts, we have to have a concrete mind in order to produce thoughts in the world of concrete thought. Now, since the thinker is in but not of the concrete subdivision of the world of thought, but is beyond it, and it is functioning directly in the world of thought, deliberately within the world of thought, the thinker must be in and of the abstract subdivision of the world of thought. Everything that is beyond the concrete worlds, including the abstract mind, is universal. All of the spiritual worlds beyond the concrete mind are universal and they are abstract. Everything that is beyond the concrete realms is spirit. And being spirit, it's divine and it's creative. And because it is spirit, it is the very nature of spirit to give. It is the very nature of spirit to create. We say that we refer to the universal spirit by the name of God, and we say that God is a creator. So from this, we can see that in its giving, the thought forms that are produced are a divine gift. So we can say that an idea which comes from the thinker is a gift and a creation. Now in astrology, we say that the abstract mind and the ideas that are born in the abstract mind are ruled by Jupiter. And it doesn't take much knowledge of astrology to know that Jupiter is a very big-spirited giver. By its nature, it has to give. This is why when we receive ideas, it is a blessing. Several people noted that when talking about what an idea is. It's a blessing. Now, in this, we as human beings are near the beginning of a great cosmic activity. We are drawing into our vehicles of consciousness, our creations, and we're doing so in waking self-consciousness. We're drawing into our vehicles of consciousness. There's that word again, drawing. And it's deliberate that we are drawing. So the thinker works from both sides. Previous to this indrawing, our experience through our vehicles of consciousness was from without. Before that, before this began, we didn't have waking self-consciousness. We lacked freedom to do anything on our own. Our experiences were all determined for us from without, and everything that was done with our vehicles was done from without. But now we can enter into our vehicles and experience in matter. And we can more directly have experience and influence matter and take part of the great creation and evolution that's taking place in it. This is a little bit of a non sequitur, but it's something that relates to our times. Something that I'm not good at all. But I am amazed at how adept some people are at ruling things or using things outside of themselves, functioning indirectly outside of something rather than being in it. I had a girlfriend once, and she had 5 kids, and she had a Pac-Man console in her basement. She said, "Come on, play Pac-Man." I couldn't do anything. I don't know how to do that. And she was zip, zip, zip. You know, she was got it all right away. And I'm always amazed at how much people can manipulate things on screens or other devices like that, and at the same time be unself-conscious, unaware of themselves as the doer. There's so much involved in the thing outside of themselves that they lose track of who they are. At least with athletes who can do all those phenomenal things with their bodies, they're at least inside of their body when they're doing, even if they're not completely self-consciously aware. Though I must say I do have hopes about these new devices now for older people to keep them from having brain degeneration or keep them from losing good consciousness. They have games now that you play on computers, and the games are designed to help you generate your memory and to keep a salient, clear consciousness in the world. And they're quite popular, and a lot of people are just really big on them. And this got me to thinking, it's still part of the non sequitur, maybe we could try to design a game that would help people to become self-conscious, to not only do the function of the game, but have the game designed in such a way or have it interfered with in such a way that you can only go forward by being self-conscious with what you're doing. All right. So the spirit and its ideas being in the mind and its thoughts that are produced, this is a matter that's great importance. It's a great fascination for me. We in our human consciousness are grossly imperfect, but the spirit isn't. Our bodies, which were created by the Spirit when we weren't deliberately, wakingly self-conscious, because we had only a sort of a stunned kind of consciousness before coming back to birth. It was much clearer than it is now, but it wasn't really waking. Our bodies function marvelously. Even in illness, they function marvelously. The human body is a magnificent creation. So this means that the spirit that has produced it is probably a pretty developed thing. Nonetheless, we've fallen into selfish and into sinful ways. And we were given a lower nature to protect us until we could enter into our vehicles and rule for our own. And somehow we've managed to foster and nurture that lower nature into a false ego, which is sort of a monster of vanity and of selfishness. And not only that, we have allowed this to have some control over our concrete mind. It's obvious. Sometimes when you say to yourself, well, I'm going to ponder this, I'm going to ponder the question, what is an idea? And the concrete mind, under the sway of the personal ego, it has other ideas. And it doesn't want that. And it takes a powerful will to keep from being pulled off by it. One of the results of this is that in ourselves we have an argument, a nasty argument between the self, what we in our right mind, so to speak, in our mind where we intend to do all good things, and this false ego, which doesn't want that at all. So we have a fight where there should be a give and take, where there should be a dialogue between the two. It's so bad that when our divine being is manifest, we're so used to assuming ourselves as being the lower nature that we think this was a gift of God. It really was a gift of God, like if you're doing something creative, but we don't realize that the God is our true being. And what we consider is like an ugly stepsister that is what we consider to be our being. So what we're saying is that in thinking, both points of view, the concrete and the abstract or the ideational, take part in the act of creating a creative archetype. This is wholesale speculation. There must always be a tension between the abstract and the concrete because their ends are so very different from each other. And I often wonder whether that tension, that back and forth, isn't what makes the world go round. By that I mean everything that in the world, that is in all of the different realms, are said to be spinning or vibrating, and neither of those words is a really good word. Spinning probably better than vibrating. And the concrete things are set a spin in the process. You know, it's sort of like the back and forth of the churning between the divine and human parts of ourselves. In any case, what we're saying is that there's a big difference in perspective between the thinker or the ideational part of our being and the concrete part of ourself with the pseudo-ego in it. From the perspective of the concrete mind, it appears that thinking is questioning. It's drawing something out from the spirit. While in the abstract mind, it is a giving. And so that the formation of a thought form, when seen from the viewpoint of the thinker, the higher nature, that a thought form is extruded into a vacuum, and that it is a compound process where when we draw something out, something is given to it at the same time, so that the thinking from the thinker, the spiritual part of our being, is together, working together hand in hand with questioning. So, awakening to the spirit, in the simplest manner, is shifting our conscious attention from the concrete to the abstract. And when we do that, we have to bring our consciousness, or allow our consciousness, to become like the spirit. And that becoming like the consciousness of the Spirit is very much Jupiterian. It's enthusiasm. Like the ancient Greeks and all of the Neoplatonists say that the higher consciousness is accomplished through enthusiasm. Okay, from all of this we know a little bit more about abstracting, but to say that an abstract thought is, that an idea is an abstract thought is still not very satisfying. We won't get to the really satisfying ones until the very end. There just isn't enough there for us. To some extent, transcendental things will always be that way. We are so habituated by concrete things that we want the shells of truth rather than the spirit and the life of truth. Even when we do abstract things like mathematics, and the ideas are very vivid and very exciting, but we lose them quickly. We're not present to them. I've had the experience, I think I've mentioned it in here before, I've had the experience many times of following a professor prove a theorem or make a derivation of some kind of identity or something like that, and you follow it along, you say, wow, that's beautiful, the way that unfolds that way, and then the professor's done, and so is your consciousness. So our experience of the abstract, that is, our experience of ideas, is very vague. Even when they are derived, when we get the idea and we get it very clearly, we have to rely on the concrete to make diagrams or things like that. And that's all right. That's the way we grew up. But I'm just trying to say that even though all of the things that we have to say about what an idea is are going to be a little vague, it doesn't have to be that way. You know, mathematical things are completely abstract, and they're very precise. All right, let's go to a second answer to what is an idea. And it's quite similar to the first, and it probably will also not be very satisfactory. The second idea, or second statement of what is an idea is a universal principle. Of course, that brings us to the same tedious kind of process again. What is a universal principle? One could say that a universal principle is an existent abstract truth which applies everywhere. It's about as good as you can do. But there are also several problems with that statement. Sometimes when we are ideating, it's not so clear, and things don't seem like universal principles that apply everywhere and at all times. We have, with math, it's fairly easy, but a lot of other things it isn't. For example, we say, I'm getting an idea about that person's psychology, or I have an idea of how to deal with this social problem. And when that is happening, when we're forming ideals, it seems rather nebulous. It doesn't seem like a principle that is clear and sharp and the truth is indubitable. We're journeymen as ideators. And our transcendent consciousness, if we have any at all, is thin. Most humans do not have ideas. They do not conceive ideas, would be a better way to say it. Somebody talked about that earlier, saying giving birth to an idea. Quite a few people, most people, can perceive ideas, as when they take math classes, but they can't conceive them. And even when ideas are conceived as in mathematics, as brilliant as they are, they're still pretty low grade. Even something like the Pythagorean theorem is a pretty low grade idea compared to an idea that creates the whole universe and sustains it. It's a pretty light idea. In this, we can see that there are different grades and different kinds of ideas. In the Rosicrucian philosophy, it is stated that there are 3 regions in the abstract subdivision of the world of thought. There's the region of geminal ideas of desire and emotion. Going in deeper, there is the geminal ideas of life. And going to the deepest of all is the region of the geminal ideas of form. Form differentiating anything from everything in that sense. Now, if we formulate something like the Pythagorean theorem, it's quite an accomplishment. Even a new proof of it is quite an accomplishment. People still do that. We had a president, I believe it was President Garfield, who was very, very bright. Don't quote me on that because I'd have to look it up. Was very, very bright, and in his spare time in the White House, he used to derive geometric proofs, and he made one of the neatest proofs of the Pythagorean theorem that I've ever seen. I had a nice old-fashioned math book, and that came through. They had the original proofs that people made of things, and it showed really ingenious kind of thinking. All right. But the Pythagorean theorem is nowhere near as profound of a conception, or I don't know if it's a conception or a reading, than that of universal gravitation. We're talking about the creative principle, not the Newtonian restatement of it, but the creative principle behind reality. This is something that's an idea. That's a universal truth. Another problem that we have is that we have biased, non-inclusive ideas about what a universal principle is. A myth is an abstract story, and it's based on universal principle, though not everyone realizes it. Now, that's not to say that every story, not even every allegory, is based on a universal principle. But those that have been given to humanity and that have had the staying power and they have guided humanity are based on universal principles. Psychologists will go to myths to draw information from the geminal ideas of emotion and desire. Cosmologists will go to a myth in order to get ideas from the geminal ideas of form, drawing on the same myth which cuts across all of the regions. Mathematical ideals, though they are very deep and lofty and pure beyond most people's consciousness, are not limited to mathematics. They work in the other regions of geminal ideas also. A few years ago, we did 1 year's worth of talks on myths of triangles. And it looked like it was going to be too big of a project, and I thought other things were more important. But I feel sort of frustrated, and I'd almost someday like to go back to it, because there could have been at least another half a dozen myths on triangles that would have been, in terms of transcendental awareness of internal trinity, would have been very, very valuable. So, not all stories are not all myths are transcendental, abstract, and not all of them are based on the truths of the cosmos. So we ask one of the same tedious kinds of questions again. How do we know whether something is a universal principle or not? That's certainly relevant because we're considering a myth that even applies to mathematics or a principle. We don't always know. Even in mathematics, which is very clear and has this big foundation of centuries of thoughts of proven within the structure of logic, whether something is true or not. For example, there was just recently the proof of Fermat's last theorem, or last principle. And the proof is dozens of pages of equations. And a lot of mathematicians had to take it page by page to see if there were flaws in each page before the whole thing could be put together and understood as one idea. This is really quite something. To understand something as a whole and get that real clear recognition that mathematicians use all the time. They say, well, this is intuitively true. Because intuition is one of the ways that we determine whether a universal is a universal. Now, the concept of intuition that is used by mathematicians, they use the word intuition more than academic philosophers do, because they depend on it. I'm sure every one of us has heard a math professor or a grad student or something like that and say, after he's proved something, he says, we can see this is intuitively true. Now, when a mathematician says that, we as truth knowers, in our consciousness, we go along with the mathematician. We rise above even the idea, and we have a kind of pure intuition that can see that the idea is true. And that is one of the ways we learn whether something is universal or not. Oh, it's going along nicely. This won't be more than an hour and 15 or 20 minutes. All right. Another answer to how do we know something is universal or not has to do with fruitfulness. Now, fruitfulness is not an absolute criterion of universality, but it's an indicator. Earlier we said that the abstract mind and ideation are astrologically ruled by Jupiter. And as we said, Jupiter is generous. He's the lord of the Amalthea, which some people call the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. This is especially so when we're looking from our perspective as we are now in the concrete worlds. In concretion, there are definite limits. And the limitation is the very nature of the concrete. So the concrete mind is ruled by Mercury. It's practical. And not only that, it's versatile. It's almost like St. Paul says, can be many things to many people. Putting these things together, we can see that concretization is done by thoughts being precipitated from ideas or principles. In fact, multiple thoughts, often of various different kinds, can be precipitated from one principle. If you ever get a chance, I think there are probably videos. I didn't look on YouTube. I was going to do that and forgot it. Richard Feynman, the great physicist, gave lectures on physics. And those lectures on physics are very deep. All the grad students read them before they take their prelims. And what they find is that in these lectures, many different things are made from one principle. And the principle itself is looked at from many points of view. And the truth then is given in details. the concretes that come out of it. So if it's fruitful, especially fruitful from a universal principle, that's a sign that it's a universal principle, especially since if all the fruitful things work. Now, in our earthly existence, we have a lot of misunderstandings about universals and about ideas. I myself have a Jupiter that gives me what I call a disease called Platonitis. I get too abstract about things, and I love speculation. And it's all right if you know that you're speculating, because scientists, so they say they never speculate, often do. They call it a tentative hypothesis, which is a speculation. And in that speculative nature, I thought a lot of things were ideas that eventually proved to not be so. They were abstract notions, but they weren't really ideas. I've asked the question that Plato asks about thinking. Plato says that it's impossible to think falsely, or he implies it. He doesn't actually out and out say it. And I certainly wonder whether it is possible to ideate falsely. It is the attitudes around ideas that are false and not ideas themselves, if they're really ideas. The reason for the fruitfulness in ideas has something to do with their integrity. Ideas are consistent throughout. That's the very nature of universal. Universals are wholes. They are wholes within the one, within the universe. And since universals are subsets of pure truth, within pure being, they are consistent in truth. The phenomenal worlds are not only of limitations, but of exceptions and of imperfection. We all know that you can't make a perfect measurement because that's impossible in the concrete world. So the exceptions probably have something to do with something being true unknowns, but we can't go into that now because that's way too big and way outside of what we're trying to get at. So if something is universal, it applies everywhere. It applies every when. Even if it's a universal within another universal. Now, because of this wholeness and the truth that is within it, there is this internal integrity. And because of that integrity, we should be able to make deductions and to determine whether something is universal or not. This goes beyond fruitfulness. This goes to testability. If something is a universal principle from the divine realms beyond the concrete, it should be conducive to creation. It should be procreative. Plato believed that creation is all done from universals to particulars, and the Platonic way is to work from universals to particulars. And he lived by what he said. Well, you know, as what his philosophy was lived in, the way he lived his life. And the way best of all is when he understood an idea, a universal idea, he could make all those lovely allegories. Some of the most shining, clear allegories that you can find in the history of thought come from Plato. Because he was creative with them. They were fruitful for him, and he could prove them. For myself, the ability to make an analogy or to produce an allegory or something like that is the way I tell whether I'm on the beam or not with my spiritual life. If I am truly in my spiritual life, then analogies and allegories that hold up and that you can deduce other things from come very easily. All right, this brings us to to another answer to what is an idea. And this way of looking at an idea is a little different. And it's probably, of all of the ones that we're going to look at tonight, it's probably the best. The way that it is different is by perspective. All the notions that we have looked at previously have been from the concrete, because that's where we are. This view is from the top down, not from the bottom up. That is, we're trying to look from spirit into matter and not from matter into spirit. Spiritual things ultimately are transcendental things, and they're almost always top-down. Plato was a top-down person. Aristotle was a bottom-up person. Top-down is the order of creation. An idea is a conception that comes from above, but that's not the answer. The answer to what is an idea is a limit. An idea is a limit. And this usage of the word limit is fairly simple to the usage in calculus, except it is inverse. Now, this seems to be an awfully strange idea, since we have already ascertained that an idea is universal. It applies everywhere and every when. Yet, if we look at something like mathematics, which is quite abstract, it's not only universal, it's precise. There's no room for things to be any other way, provided your axioms or your postulates are set down. If something is mathematically true from them, it's indubitably true. Looking at mathematical principles and other universals, their limits are not frustrating. They're liberating. It's almost like the Bible when it says you'll know the truth and the truth shall make you free. They're liberating when you know that something is true and there's no doubt about it. You don't have to wish, you don't have to have any insecurity about it. You can prove it. And you can prove it to anybody who's capable of following the proof. So we can see from this that vehicles of truth, even more than concrete thoughts, are filled with truth. This includes ideas. This is hard. This gets to really hard stuff. This brings us to exactly where we want to be, because again we have another one of those obvious but tedious questions. What are ideas' limits? Ideas are ideas from pure, unconditioned truth. In saying this, we keep in mind that the world of thought is next to the world of life spirit. It is within and interpenetrated by life spirit. In terms of cosmogony, which these talks are supposed to be around, the world of thought is precipitated or unfolded out of and within the life spirit. It is succeedent to the world of life spirit. To us, in our consciousness, life spirit is pure truth. It's unconditioned truth. It's like what you guys call the void, I think. It's void of any attribute that you could assign to it, even though the next series of talks is going to be on Christ and the life spirit, and we're going to put all kinds of attributes about it to try and get a hold of at least a little wisp of it. All of this corresponds with the deepest of ideation and abstract thinking by humans until now. There is a field of study that is called the philosophy of logic. It is simultaneously called mathematical philosophy. So it's not surprising that the deepest region of the world of thought, the region which, so to speak, abuts the life spirit, is the region of germinal ideas of form, which are mathematical ideas, geometry or analysis or algebra or any of those things are ideas of form. Now, in this philosophy of logic, there is a proven theorem that is called the incompleteness theorem. It was a theorem that was proved by a man that was both a mathematician and a logician named Kurt Gödel, a Swiss man who was Einstein's close friend when they were both at Princeton together. And in terms of what really counts, the findings of Gödel are far more important than those of Einstein. In fact, Gödel even called himself a Neoplatonist. According to the incompleteness theorem, any logic, including mathematics, any logical system that is internally consistent must be incomplete.
Internally consistent?
Yes. Any logical system or mathematical system that is internally consistent must be incomplete. What this says is you can't put the whole truth into a system, which is exactly what we say in mysticism. According to the incompleteness theorem, there is truth beyond and outside, so to speak, logic and mathematics. This is what the boundary is between the region, the subdivision of ideational thought and life spirit. It is, this is what it's like. So this is saying that abstract thoughts are limits within pure truth. Now Gödel actually tried, in his Neoplatonistic way, he actually tried to transcend when he could see that any logical system isn't going to have the whole truth in it. He was hungry and wanted the whole truth, but he hadn't prepared himself the way a true Neoplatonist was, and as a consequence he had a lot of mental problems. That's because he was only mental. Now normally when we think about limits, we think about borders or fences or things like that. That's because we're materialistic. We're thinking bottom up. When we think of ideas or ideation, we're talking about internal limits, which from the bottom up we see as consistency, as logical consistency, but internal limits are something that we experience in ourselves. When we are disciplined, that is a form of experience of an internal limit. We're not habituating ourselves to outer conditions. We if it is a true discipline, it is something inside of us. All of those things like martial arts and all those things where people try to get discipline, the only people who are successful are the ones that find it in themselves. Oh yes, you can beat up 16 guys at a time or something like that, but that's not the same thing as being free, because you know yourself from within and you are disciplined from within. Being able to know what we can and can't do is another form of internal limitation. Now, in this, we have opened up an extremely large topic worth many, many hours of discussion in not the few minutes that we have left for us. We're going to return to it again in the next sub-series on Christ and the Life Spirit. But for now, let's just look at one little metaphysical question. Why do we have the logical system, that is, the principles that we have? The principles through which our entire solar cosmos and everything in it came into being. Why do we have this set of principles? Tough question, really, really hard. It could be arbitrary. It could be just a whim of the universal spirit. It could be intuitive, like an artist who chooses just the right line for what he sort of consciously knows he wants to do. Of course, this would mean that the universal spirit has an unconscious and an intuition within the absolute as well, which is something very, very big to contemplate. It would be a higher octave of anything that we know of as an intuition now. It could be necessity. It could be that we have the system of principles, the limitations within the universal spirit, because it is necessary. I don't like that one, because it indicates that there is something basically in the absolute that it has to be this way. And that's not the way freedom works. The universal spirit takes on limitations to share a creation and to bring more into the glory of spiritual consciousness, but it isn't that it has to be this way because that's the nature of things. That's, again, materialistic thinking. But there may be another kind of necessity, and that is, once there is the initial ray, the initial act of creation, that in itself sets up the set of principles to be the way they have to be. So that mathematics isn't just a matter of arbitrarily picking out axioms to start a system, and it isn't just a matter of it has to be that way because that's the way it is all the time in the absolute, but when one creates and takes the action of creation, that automatically produces a set of principles that everything follows from. It's not greatly different from any other creative action. It's not really different than throwing a bowling ball, and the way you release the ball is the way its trajectory is going to go, but it's on a much, much, much higher level. So we can see from all of this, this is exciting stuff to me. As hard as it is to understand, it's very exciting to me. But transcendental metaphysics gets very deep and very difficult quickly. Fortunately, for people like ourselves, we can come back to it again and again and again, and that until we can have that consciousness where we can continuously be in an intuition that's always unfolding and awakening, that continues like a dawn that never ends, that's the way it has to be. All right, we have room for one more answer to the question of what is an idea. It'll have to be very quick, I'll have to be very superficial and very brief. An idea, somebody hinted on this one, an idea is a divine entity. An idea is a divine entity. After all, everything that is transcendental is in the spiritual realms. Therefore, everything that is in those realms has a quality of divinity about it. It was tempting to me for many years to think that all of the ideas and principles in the world are gods. That isn't quite true. Many are. Many of the principles and ideas are the embodiment of divinity. But there are ideas that have sort of a elemental quality about them that they're made of divine stuff, but they don't have the character of a divine being in a creative sense. Now, this statement that ideas are divine entities is not without purpose, because I have found in my life that the more you can keep a reverential attitude when you approach ideas in ideation, the more likely it is to be fruitful. We don't have to say, all right, prove it to me. We don't have to struggle with it that way. Most of the great things, including the principle of universal gravitation, if it is true that an apple fell and hit Newton on the head, and he said, why do apples fall down rather than up? He has Liber rising, which means the proximity to apple trees, but I don't think that's the way it is. So that's all I have to say. Next talk will be about the combined abstract and concrete thinking, and that may be the end of, as far as we go, talking about the world of thought. That's it.
A couple of comments.
Yes.
Firstly, I don't know that I agree with everything that you said.
Perfectly fine.
But for the most part, okay. But one of the thoughts that I had written down, or had thought about when and couldn't remember it, you brought out in just about first sentence, and that was, abstract thought is brought about by desire. All thought is brought about by desire of one sort or another. Whatever the nature of the desire at that moment might be, whatever it might be.
It all depends what you mean by the word desire. I don't think it means something.
You are searching for something that you're always. If you didn't have any desire to know the truth, you wouldn't be asking the question in the first place.
That I don't agree with.
Okay. Well, anyhow.
Because the greatest ideations are those that come from the divine, and they are given as gifts and not as questionings. That doesn't mean that there isn't questioning in the divine also, but I don't think that the exclusive source of ideas is desire.
So anyhow, what I was writing down during this was, having received some sort of abstract thought, and depending on the attitude and desire of that moment, a decision is made as to whether or not to turn it into concrete thought of one nature or another. Whether that thought takes the form of some form of concretion is unknown. Though the thought might only be abstract at the moment and not concrete in its nature, it now is already a thing. And so it needs to be acted upon, whether it is by you or by someone else. It might not be at this moment, but eventually it will inevitably have to be acted upon.
Maybe.
Because it was created, okay? Another thing I wrote down was, it is almost impossible for a person, any person, to really retain and maintain an abstract thought because of the human nature. It almost has to take a form of concretion in order for you to try and even understand it, whether that form be something as simple as a math equation or whatever. A math equation is a concrete form. And the last thing that I put down, probably, I put it down that I will contend that the concrete mind can only truly understand concrete thought. Abstract thought can never be proved to human beings of this realm. It somehow has to be converted to some sort of concrete form.
Yeah. The concrete form points at the abstract reasoning.
Yeah, and so, I mean, whether that, it's like a universal law. I mean, it boils down to render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God. So, ideas, I don't know, ideas, I think you only get though when you are searching for them. Because when you are looking for an idea on something, you are looking to effectively, I think, become a creator. And whether that be the creator of a thought, the creator of a thing, the creator of some sort of form, or even the creation of a thought process in general. But I think that's about the only time that you get an idea.
That's from the human perspective. That's
Yes.
the concrete perspective, the
Yes.
bottom-up perspective.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, and considering that I am in the bottom, I do not, I'm in this human body. I cannot transcend into another realm at this particular point in time. That's the only way I can do it,
I don't believe that.
you know?
No. Because most of the people that have baptism by the Holy Spirit, that is exactly what they have done. They have transcended this to the higher level. And it isn't necessarily a seeking. It is something else. It's the receiving of a gift. The best example I can think of from history is from that man. Remember that book I gave you a few years ago, the Screwtape Letters?
Yeah,
That man was a very, very intelligent man and not at all a spiritual man. And then he was surprised by a transcendent experience that he wasn't looking for, and all of his Christianity came out of that experience. He was surprised by it. The intention of the Spirit is different than the intention of the personality. When you become a seeker, then you're trying to work together with that, with the higher intention, and provided you don't get too wrapped up in what you're doing, and you are receiving the Spirit, and you are, to use the word that occultists don't like, but mystics do, when you are obedient. When you are obedient to the Spirit and open and say, whatever you give me, I will do, and the answers will come afterwards. But it's a different,
agree. Yeah,
Yeah, it's the, when you are experiencing things in abstract, It is literally the way folk language says it is. When you say that went over my head, that's exactly what it is. Because I can remember the first time I read Plato. I was already deeply into the spiritual path, and I'm sitting there reading, and where the spirit enters the body at the Golgotha point, where all the bones come together there, over that is like what Ian is called the tongue of flame or the tongue of lightning in what that they had in Pentecost. And I would be reading Plato, and I could feel flickers over my head in the spirit, but I wasn't conscious. I was more conscious than I probably had ever been before in my life, but I wasn't conscious of it in the same way that I'm conscious when I'm driving the car. But that part of me that goes beyond my mere personality was doing something, and I was experiencing it. All right, I think we did last an hour and a half, almost. Any more questions, statements, anything like that? Thank you.